Kia ora koutou, my name is Lauren Roberts from Lincoln University, and this presentation is about the South Island high country and how farm management is changing within this unique environment. This presentation is based on Derek Moot's research, a professor at Lincoln University, and a case study around Bog Roy Station. Now, before I get started, I think it's important to mention that the primary sector offers great opportunities, and as long as you're keen to get involved, then there's a place for you. It's also worth mentioning that 50% of New Zealand's land is used in the primary sector, with 48% being forest and conservation land, and the remaining 2% urban environments. So any management decisions made in the primary sector can have a big impact on our environment, society, and economy. We also need a lot more people entering the industry, and having people that understand these systems is important. So if you want to make a difference and get out and about, then consider doing a Bachelor of Ag. This degree is not just knowledge-based, but also experience. As part of the program, you get to do labs on Lincoln University farms and 2 practicums, 1 dairy, 1 sheep, and any remaining time can be in the industry. If animals are not your thing, then potentially viticulture could be. Learn how to make your own wine from your own row of grapes, experience identifying good wine through wine tastings and vineyard tours. And if you don't like wine and prefer beer, yogurt, cheese, kombucha, then brewing and fermentation is for you. If your focus is more on the environment, then conservation and ecology or environmental science can help you manage and protect the thing that you value, the environment. Lincoln University is a great place to be because we have small class sizes, so you can ask your lecturers questions and get to know everyone. This has resulted in a 94% course completion rate and a 6% higher graduate employment rate. Lots of people think that if you enter the primary sector, then you're stuck in New Zealand. No OE. But other countries also produce these products, so there are job opportunities overseas as well. There are also international companies that you can be a part of, and often we tour overseas to see what other countries are doing, and if it would work in New Zealand. Go to Growing NZ to look for scholarships. You got to be in to win, and you don't have a lot to lose. It's free money. In the primary sector, there's always the opportunity to also start your own business if you want to be your own boss. So come and join the primary sector because we need you. And now onto the high country. When people think high country, they tend to think of this. It's important to note that though this environment looks familiar and natural, it has already gone through extensive change. There is evidence that Māori used fires for hunting, potentially moa. This grew the area of tussock lands to their extensive present-day range. So what should the high country look like? Most people would say the picture on the left, and that is the natural high country, with the picture on the right looking very strange. However, when Europeans arrived, we brought the idea of improving the land and making it more productive by introducing pasture species, but they also brought weeds. In fact, the brown sad-looking grass to the left is an introduced weed that takes over, and the trees in the background are also introduced. So let's explore why we might see more of the high country becoming green. Climate plays a significant part in farmers' decision-making and overall management. The high country is in the rain shadow, with most water falling on the west coast due to orographic rainfall, leaving little moisture for the interior where the high country is located. This results in a lack of soil moisture, but it depends on your soil type on how much water it can retain over summer. Of course, the further north you go, the warmer it gets, and the further south you go, the colder. And although it might be sunny in the high country, it is really the soil temperature that determines plant growth. So climate is really, really important due to the relationship it has on plant growth. We're interested in plant growth because we need to feed animals. So how much feed do we need? Let's work through the following calculation. Feed requirements for animals is calculated to be 3% of body weight per day. The average ewe is around 70 kgs, so needs about 2.1 kgs of dry matter. Dry matter is what's left over after all the water is removed. Think potato versus potato chip/crisp. So we need 10.5 kgs of fresh pasture per day for each ewe. Let's say the average flock size is estimated to be 2,000 ewes, So a farmer would need 21,000 kgs of fresh grass per day. Now, not all grass provides the same nutrients. Generally speaking, if it's lush, young and green, then it's of high quality. When grasses mature or get old, then they're all fibrous, tough, and take more energy to digest. So lucerne is very green and very nutritious. Tussock is yellow and tough, so stock don't really like to eat it. If they're desperate, they will, but it's not their preferred option. So we have to find quite a bit of food to feed our stock. Let's have a look at Bog Roy Station and get an idea of how much feed a high country station needs to provide. Bog Roy is 2,860 hectares. It's situated on the southeastern shore of Lake Benmore in the upper Waitaki catchment. They have merino sheep, so fine wool is their main source of income, but lambs for meat are also important. These are called store lambs. In terms of land composition, short tussock grassland is about 47% of the land area. High country, which is slightly better pastures, is 42%, and the flatter land located in the valleys is about 11%, and has traditionally been irrigated using flood irrigation. Very old school. It's also one of the most inefficient ways of irrigating because it's done by flooding the paddocks. Traditionally, they kept store lambs on until the following summer because it takes that long to get the weight on them. In terms of stock, they had 3,900 breeding ewes and about 1,700 ewe hoggets. So these are your replacements. From those hoggets, only 1,000 hoggets were actually selected to be the replacement stock on farm. 500 were sold on to replacement for stock for other farms, and 200 were sent to the works. They also have 110 cows. That is a lot of feed that they need to find, but it gets more complicated due to the climate. Because it has a continental climate, they have about 100 days to grow all their feed for the year. To give an idea of how tough it can be, in springtime, their most productive time, their growth rates are about the same as a dairy farm in winter, the least productive time for dairy farms. This climate is also pretty risky in terms of losing stock. It pretty much snows every year. If you look at the graph, you can see feed demand remaining reasonably constant. However, feed supply is a different story. As you can see in spring, they get a lot of growth. This is when they get enough feed to last them for the rest of the year. But they don't want pasture to get too mature or else the quality goes down. This is where the 110 cows are important. The beef cattle are mobile lawnmowers that don't mind tougher feed, which helps clean up the pasture when it gets too long, allowing new growth and young delicious pasture that can be used for sheep. The other important technique is preserving feed for the 6 months when there isn't enough, but this can be expensive. This can be done through silage or baleage, which is when pasture is effectively pickled, like pickled onions or gherkins. But as you can see from the picture, it is labour intensive and weather dependent. It can't be done in the rain or if the cut grass is too wet. Benchmarked against other merino properties, the business performed above average. However, there were a few areas that could do with some improvement. The hill country pastures were declining despite oversowing, which is supplying good quality pasture seeds, and top dressing, which is providing fertiliser and nutrients. This is a sign of too much pressure on hill country pastures. They need longer to recover, but they're also not reliable due to their variable production. The flood irrigation consent was up for renewal and required conversion to spray irrigation, which is a lot more efficient. But that required considerable capital expenditure, and the returns would only really service the new debt. So increasing irrigation meant selling the property in order to get the returns from the investment, which is not something that they were interested in. So are there dryland pasture plants that could possibly work because they don't require as much water? Merino lambs also have a very low growth rate. It just means they don't put on weight easily, and poor mothering ability. Essentially, if times get tough, then mum's going to leave lamb. After going on a study tour around South Africa It showed farmers achieving 140% lambing rates for merinos, which means about half the merinos are having twins. In New Zealand, it's about 80 to 100%, so most ewes are having one lamb. South African farmers were achieving this through provision of high-quality feed. So what are some potential solutions? Luckily, lucerne is a dryland plant that can work in the high country. It's really nutritious and can be grazed multiple times. It works in the high country because it has a long taproot, sometimes over 3 metres, so it can access water even in summer. It has high protein content and is high energy, so it puts weight on animals quickly and they don't need to eat as much. Plus, they love it. And it's quite bushy, so it provides a lot of feed as well as high quality feed. Rye corn is a crop which means it can only be grazed once. However, it can survive low temperatures and can be used in winter. Because it can be left in the field, there isn't the same labour costs as silage. But getting these plants established takes effort. I mentioned before brown top is a weed. This is because it has no feed value and is very resilient and competitive. The slightest amount of moisture means it goes into the very productive stage, spreading seed, but also spreads through the ground, which means it outcompletes other plants. It's so competitive that it takes all the nutrients and develops a thick mat to prevent other plants from establishing. So the options is to spray it out or burn it. This creates a gap in the ecosystem for new plants to enter, so they are direct drilled 5 centimetres deep in autumn. Direct drilling is important because it doesn't disturb the soil too much. A cut is created in the ground, a seed dropped in, and then pressure is applied to seal the ground back up and also to conserve that soil moisture. By killing the plants in spring, that means water in the soil is conserved over summer. If living plants are present, they continue to respire and release water into the atmosphere until they can't get any more water from the soil and die due to the heat anyway. So the system has changed. What does this look like and what are the consequences? The best way of looking at this is for a calendar. So in autumn, we have mating. If the ewes are in good condition, they have a good amount of weight on them, they're more likely to have twins. Rye corn starts to be used as stock feed. Lucerne is left to recover and replenish root reserves, so they have enough to actually get going in spring. And if there's some autumn rainfall, that means some extra feed will be on the hill country. So light grazing pressure, but don't rely on it. In winter, rye corn continues to be used as stock feed until it runs out. Then they are converted over to silage. Hill country and high country are left alone, and the goal is to maintain stock condition. So hopefully we can maintain their weight. We don't want them to get too fat or else they'll have birthing problems. But those with twins definitely get better quality feed because they're having to grow 2 lambs. In spring, lambing happens, and lucerne starts to be a key source of high quality feed. If the ewe is having high quality feed, then they have high milk production, and therefore the lambs gain weight really quickly, which means they can be weaned early. Ewes then get a chance to actually put some weight back on without the lamb taking away all their reserves. The high country plants at that time are flowering and spreading their seed, and then they die before summer and they essentially become standing hay. In summer, the ewes are weighed and the heavy ones are put on the tops. They tend to graze between the tussocks. They're eating the standing hay because it's just nicer and actually has high nutrition. This allows them to maintain their weight. Look, the tussocks in Matagari are actually really important environments because they provide shelter. They will get nibbled at, but they're not preferred by stock. Our light ewes are then put onto lucerne because obviously they need really high quality feed to get that weight back on before mating. The lambs are then finished off on lucerne and then sent to the works. This means they're only on farm for a couple of months, and not having to carry them over winter is such a relief. That's approximately 3,000 less mouths to feed. By integrating lucerne and rye corn, it becomes a more intensive operation in the valleys, which remember is about 11% of the farm, and takes the pressure off the hill country and the high country. This allows native plants and biodiversity to flourish and maintains plant cover. So by introducing these two plants to the system, the flow-on effects were the number of lambs weaned going from 90,000 tonnes of live weight in 2008 to nearly doubling to 160,000 tonnes in 2018. This is because the condition of ewes improved, which increased lamb survival and conception rates, and there was more high-quality feed, which meant that more ewes were able to be carried on the land. They went from 3,800 ewes in 2008 up to 4,750 ewes in 2018. The number of lambs being born increased as well. Previously, most ewes were only having one lamb, with a few having twins. By the end of 10 years, nearly half of the mixed-age ewes were having twins. Hoggets are less likely to have twins, just because they have some more growing to do. Remember that the number of ewes increased by nearly 1,000, so over that time, that is a lot more lambs. The growth rate of lambs also increased from around 170 grams per head per day to around 280 grams per head per day. This meant that the lambs were weaned from around 120 days down to 80 days. So in summary, they went from 3,800 ewes plus meat lambs being on farm for more than a year, 20 hectares of lucerne only producing about 90 tonnes of lamb per year, in a hill country in declining condition with an irrigation consent being renewed. In the 10 years, they've increased the amount of high-quality feed by including 250 hectares of lucerne, which is producing 160 tonnes of lamb per year. There's less pressure on the hill country and the high country, and most of it's concentrated in the 11% area of lowland. They've also increased stock numbers to 4,750 ewes, with meat lambs only being on the farm for a couple of months. Because they've increased ewe condition, they've also increased lamb survival, so lamb mortality has decreased from 30% to 21%. There's also been the positive of increased clean wool weight from young stock, which is our hoggets. Remember that they are a merino station, so they are providing wool, but obviously meat has also become a very important part of the balance. Overall, they have increased production, but they've concentrated it into the valleys and actually let the high country and hill country recover, but still have enough grazing to keep it in good condition. So I guess the question is, how should the high country look? Do you see these two photos differently?